You got a plan?
Absolutely.
A good one.
It's high risk.
How high risk?
Extremely high risk.
In 1963, Ferrari won the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Now, I'm saying this as if it were something new, but that's not true. Ferrari was already winning absolutely everything in its path. And in 63, Ferrari did more than just win. They also took second, third, fourth, fifth, and even sixth place. Indeed, the top 6 cars to finish the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 63 were all Ferraris, and that caught the attention of a certain Henry Ford Jr., the grandson of Henry Ford. In 1963, Henry Ford Jr. had to manage the Ford brand, which was becoming quite outdated. They were making old cars that didn't excite anyone and, frankly, weren't selling very well. They were missing a bit of flair, a bit of craziness, and above all, they were lacking victories in racing. Ford then found its strategy. They had to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Henry Ford Jr. went to see Ferrari with the firm intention of buying it, nothing less. Enzo Ferrari in 63 was in a bit of a financial bind and could really use the money. So why not take Henry Ford's money, who was swimming in the cash at the time? Henry Ford's lawyers went to see Enzo Ferrari in person in Modena, and I believe the meeting didn't go very well. Because the catch in the contract was that Henry Ford also wanted to buy Ferrari's racing activities because Henry Ford wanted to compete in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. However, Enzo Ferrari lived for racing, and while he had no problem selling Ferrari's road car activities, since, well, he didn't really enjoy making road cars, he was rather attached to the racing cars. That was too much for good old Enzo, who, to put it simply and politely, told Henry Ford where to go, if you know what I mean. Now, remember, at the time, Henry Ford, who thought of himself as the king of the world, had just been rejected by a little Italian craftsman making unreliable red sports car. We don't really know what was said in that 1964 meeting between Henry Ford's lawyers and Enzo Ferrari, but the key takeaway is that it went so badly that Henry Ford decided not only to defeat Enzo Ferrari, not to compete against him, but to humiliate him. I think the meeting didn't go very well. As a fun fact, throughout the entire GT40 project spanning the years it lasted, Henry Ford spent over $1 billion in today's money. Imagine that the ego of one guy made him spend $1 billion just to mess with Enzo Ferrari. To launch the project, Henry Ford called upon the best. That is, at the time, Carroll Shelby, the man himself. Carroll Shelby sourced chassis from Great Britain, and initially he used British engines. Well, but soon he's going to put 7-liter Cobra engines in them, of course. The chassis came from Great Britain. If you were wondering why the steering wheel is on the right, that's why. They went to see the Lola factories, English makers who still race today actually, and took the best of what was available. The top engines, top gearboxes, top chassis, because the goal was to win. In 1965, Ford showed up at the 24 Hours of Le Mans for the first time with a very relative success. When I say very relative, I mean they didn't win. Not even close, actually. In 1965, Ford got quite a beating. The car was very young, and the Mark I, the first series, was far from being ready to win such a complicated race. Meanwhile, Enzo Ferrari was still having a good laugh, but Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles started taking things seriously, and in 1966 the GT40 Mark II appeared. The Mark II was much more refined aerodynamically because one of the first things they realized was that the car overheated. Yeah, well, considering the car was running 24 hours straight, that's understandable. The car that you are seeing right now is a GT40 Mark I, the first series. Today, I'm not going to show you just any Ford GT40, I'm going to show you a piece of automotive history. This version, though, is a road version, but you'll notice it still retains many aspects of the GT40 as it was designed for the 24 hours of Le Mans. For example, this GT40 has a 4.2-liter V8 engine, producing between 300 and 400 horsepower with a 5-speed gearbox and about around 300 feet-pounds of torque. For a car weighing about a ton, that's pretty impressive. You also see two fuel caps because this car has two tanks, one on the left and one on the right. Inside there's a switch to go from one tank to the other. Remember, this car was made to run for 24 hours, so it needed a little bit of range, you know? I'm noticing the rear is really raw. Like, I mean, there's the gearbox, the chassis, and the exhaust, and that's pretty much it. In fact, when you walk around this car, you realize it has nothing superficial about it. This car is a pure race car. I mean, sure, I just said that it was a road car, but with the design and how the car was made, like, this is really just a pure race car. I'll open the back and you'll understand what I mean. When I say there's nothing unnecessary in the car, it's just the chassis, two shock absorbers, and an engine. This engine, by the way, this is the 4.2-liter V8 that I was talking about, and yes, the exhaust is completely open. No muffler, no catalytic converter. The engine is relatively simple because the whole idea was that the mechanics could work on it at the 24 hours of Le Mans pretty easily. We're talking about a pure race car with no compromises, designed to be assembled and disassembled as easily as possible. As for the doors, I don't know if you remember, but they had doors with roof panels on the Ford GT because this car had a sort of revival 40 years later with a modern copy of it, and you could see these doors that were true to the GT40. The idea was to add more rigidity with two anchors instead of one. The advantage was that, well, at Le Mans in 1966, when you were a bit rushed during driver changes, it was much easier to jump in like that. But let's be honest, I mean, I'm not sure the guys who jumped in there didn't hurt themselves because that had to hurt. But the idea was to increase rigidity and allow quicker access. By the way, if you're wondering why this car is called the GT40, it's because the car is 40 inches tall. It's quite small, we don't realize, but 40 inches is very low. The car is tiny, and again, there was a real focus on simplicity, compactness, and minimizing weight to make the car as competitive as possible. For example, the seats are original. Well, I'm not sure you can still call them seats because it's literally foam and fabric on metal, but this car also surprised many with the richness of its interior. The fact that it has so many gauges shows the pursuit of absolute reliability. The goal here was to have all the information in front of the driver's eyes. It meant more wiring, more gauges, more sensors, but if it helped ensure the car's reliability over 24 hours, they were willing to make that sacrifice. That's why you find so many buttons and gauges in the car, which for the time was really rare. Also, the RPM is even marked up to 8,000 RPM, but I'll stop you right there. A 4.2-liter V8 from that era doesn't like high revs, so you have to be careful. And at the end, it's all controlled by a 5-speed manual gearbox with a reverse gear. You know, just in case you need to get out of a gravel trap, which could be useful. But now, we're going to drive that car. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the Ford GT40. You know, what's crazy is that this car was born out of one person's hatred. It's a story of anger, and all this hatred is actually reflected in the car. I'm actually surprised by the performance of this car. It performs incredibly well. Of course, its performance isn't really current anymore. I mean, if you compare it to, for example, an Audi RS3, I'm pretty sure an RS3 would perform better than this. But, you know, which is sad to say, to be honest, but that was the era. You know, driving cars worth millions in real life commands a certain form of respect, but that stops like around just money, I would say. For example, you crash a Pagani, well, that's regrettable, but it can be fixed. It's recent. But if you crash this... So now I kind of want to full send it. I kind of want to see what this car can actually do on the track. So let's do it. Let's see what this car can do. Honestly, the handling is really good, and I also want to mention, by the way, the car is full stock, so I did not put any mods or upgrades into it, and honestly, the car drives, handles, and feels amazing as it is. I don't think I would ever upgrade this car, to be honest with y'all. This car is really good as it is. This car is truly amazing, man. This car, honestly, this is a masterpiece. You know, I have to remind you, this is still a car that's 60 years old, and when it's not moving, it's not a car that looks so impressive. The car is pretty small compared to modern cars, and people don't really realize what's under it. Before the video ends, I wanted to thank Voldex for adding this car in the game. I know it might sound a bit weird for some of you, but I honestly think that this might be my favorite limited, or maybe even my favorite car in the game now. I mean, when some guy makes one of the most detailed video about just one specific car, you know, there might be a chance that the car means a lot. The level of detail in the model is quite impressive. The sound though could have been a bit better, but you know, in Roblox, you can't really put your expectations too high, right? But seriously, they did an amazing job on this GT40, and I hope they will have the Mark II in the game at some point. That would be really cool to see. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you made it this far into the video, comment the word Ford. Yeah, comment the word Ford down in the comments if you made it this far into the video. Make sure to also leave a like to support me, and also subscribe if you are interested to see more content like this, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.